Now on BBC One, live from Cambridge, Mishal Husain chairs the BBC election debate.
8 days remain before we, the electorate, make our choice. And tonight, the representatives of 7 parties are here to make their pitch to our audience here in Cambridge and to you at home. Welcome to the BBC Election Debate 2017. Good evening and welcome to Senate House at the University of Cambridge for 90 minutes of question, answer and live debate. We invited the leaders of 7 parties to take part. Some are here, others chose to send senior representatives. Those here are Tim Farron, leader of the Liberal Democrats, the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, Caroline Lucas, co-leader of the Green Party, the leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood. For the Conservatives, the Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, Paul Nuttall, the leader of UKIP, and Angus Robertson, the Deputy Leader of the SNP. Our audience was selected by a leading opinion polling company to ensure that they are representative of the country as a whole. They support different parties. Some are undecided voters, and they are also equally split along the lines of last year's EU referendum. Half voted to leave the EU and half to remain. And if you'd like to join in the debate at home, you can do so on Twitter using the hashtag #BBCDebate. We begin with opening statements from all 7 politicians, the order of which was decided by the drawing of lots. First, it's the leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Theresa May called this election because she's taking you for granted. She won't turn up to these debates because her campaign of sound bites is falling apart. Unlike Theresa May, I'm not afraid to defend my policies, my principles, my values. Plaid Cymru exists to defend and build up our country. In Wales, it is Plaid Cymru that stands for fairness and equality, and everyone who chooses to call Wales home. For 100 years, Wales has voted Labour. It hasn't stopped Tory rule. Labour in Wales have their own manifesto, and they're airbrushing their leader out of their campaign. When Plaid Cymru has tried to ban 0 hours contracts and to stop the bedroom tax, Welsh Labour voted against us. It's time we stop doing what we've always done. Let's instead give Wales a voice. Give Plaid Cymru a mandate. Elect a strong team of Plaid Cymru MPs to fight for a successful future for Wales.
And our next opening statement is from Caroline Lucas of the Green Party.
On June the 8th, you can lay the foundations for a new kind of politics. Your vote can change everything. Imagine this. A country that leads the world in clean energy, not fracks its way to climate chaos. A country that spends its money on hospitals and schools, not nuclear bombs. A country that welcomes child refugees, not blocks them at the border. A country that's open to its neighbours, not isolated from them. A country that celebrates diversity, not fears it. A country that's friends with the good guys, not the climate criminals and the dodgy dictators. A country that cares for those with dementia, not one that taxes them. We've shown time and again, you don't need the keys to number 10 to open the door to change. On June the 8th, let's unlock that door together. Fearless Green MPs in opposition to the Tories. Independent Green MPs holding Labour's feet to the fire. Pioneering Green MPs to make our economy fit for tomorrow. We decide the future by what we do now. Vote Green on June the 8th.
And the next of our opening statements is for the Conservatives from Amber Rudd.
In 8 days, you have a vital choice to make about who you want to lead the country. Do you want Theresa May and her team? A team that has a plan, and it's one that doesn't duck the hard choices about living within our means, but is also a plan that will build on the success we have delivered. Success in cutting the deficit, stabilising the economy, getting more people into employment. It will build on our commitment to having a country that works for everyone. Now, there are 7 of us here tonight, and I'm sure you will hear plenty of bluff, bravado, and tempty, shiny election promises. But the only question to consider is who should be in number 10 to steer Britain to a brighter future. Jeremy Corbyn, with his money tree, wish list manifesto and no plan for Brexit, or Theresa May and her record of delivery, with her clear plan for Brexit and the strong team behind her who can make sure the country gets to that brighter future.
And next, it's Jeremy Corbyn.
Tonight, I am here to debate the future of our country. The question in this election is whether we want a country for the many or just a few. The state of our NHS, our children's schools, social care for older people, our young people saddled with debt, none of that is remotely strong or stable. And now the Conservatives want 5 more years of cuts to our vital public services to fund tax handouts for the wealthy few. Labour will make very different choices. There will be no tax rises for 95% of taxpayers, but we will ask those with the most to contribute a bit more so no one is held back from achieving their potential. On June the 8th, you have a choice: more cuts in services and living standards with the Conservatives, or vote Labour to transform Britain for the many, not the few.
And now the UKIP leader, Paul Nuttall.
UKIP will always put the interests of British people first, whether that is prioritising our NHS and social care over a bloated and ineffective foreign aid programme, or protecting those who are most at risk from wage compression because of unskilled mass immigration. UKIP will always stand up for those who have been let down and left behind by the Westminster elites. Now, a government's job, first and foremost, is to protect the public. Our police, our intelligence services, our armed forces and our border force must be given the tools and the resources they need to do their jobs effectively. But money isn't everything. Politicians must show leadership. They must, without fear or favour, ensure that our way of life, our values and our democracy is secure. I believe in our great country. I believe in British values. I believe in our way of life. And as you will see tonight, UKIP believes in Britain.
The SNP opening statement from Angus Robertson.
Good evening. This election is about the kind of country we want to be. Now, more than ever, Scotland needs strong SNP voices at Westminster. And SNP MPs will work with others to promote fairness across all of the UK. A vote for the SNP is a vote against Tory cuts that will harm our public services and push many more hard-working families into poverty. It's a vote for jobs and against an extreme Brexit, which will put jobs and living standards at risk. It's a vote to reinforce the right of the people of Scotland to decide their own future. We can't afford a Tory government which thinks it can do anything it likes without being held to account. And we can't give Theresa May a blank cheque to pursue any kind of Brexit, no matter the cost. In Scotland, the SNP is the only party strong enough to stand up to the Tories. So vote SNP for a strong voice for Scotland at Westminster. That voice is needed now more than ever.
And for our final opening statement, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Tim Farron.
Where do you think Theresa May is tonight? Take a look out your window. She might be out there sizing up your house to pay for your social care. And why do you think she called this election? She wants 5 years as Prime Minister, and she thinks you'll give it to her, no questions asked, literally. Even if she brings in a dementia tax, sacks your kids' teachers and nicks their lunches while she's at it. We can all agree that is a rubbish offer. Look, I know we don't all agree on Brexit, but she's off to negotiate a deal for you, for me, for all of us. Imagine if it's a bad deal. I mean, dementia tax bad. I know that to persuade you to vote Liberal Democrat, I have to give you some really good reasons. So here's 3. 1, I'll rescue the NHS and social care by putting a penny on income tax. 2, I'll give you the final say on the Brexit deal, not Theresa May. 3, whatever power you give me, I'll use it to stop her taking you for granted.
Thank you all for those opening statements. Let's go straight to our first question, and it comes from Nicola Collins.
I work, I pay my taxes. I haven't had a pay rise in years. I live alone and see all my bills going up. Working people are the backbone of this country. How are you going to help people like me?
Thank you, Nicola. Amber Rudd, your party's presided over this squeeze in living standards.
Well, thank you, Nicola, for the question. My party has presided over making sure that people on lower wages are able to keep more of the wages they earn. We must take it within context. Since 2009, we had, up in the run to 2009, we had one of the largest peacetime recessions, and we've managed to rebuild the economy since then. But my party is focused on making sure that we help people like Nicola, which is why we're going to continue to take people out of taxes, making sure that the amount you can earn before you have to pay tax rises to £12,500, and we're going to live within our means. Some of the offers you will hear tonight are just fanciful. In order to have a strong economy, to support Nicola and others, we need to make sure we have that strong economy. And the way to make sure that we have it is to have a strong negotiating position as we go into leaving the European Union. You're going to hear me say that a lot tonight, because the worst outcome would be if we're not able to negotiate a strong deal with the European Union.
The question is on living standards. Jeremy Corbyn.
Living standards have fallen in the past 7 years under the coalition government with the Liberal Democrats and the Tories, and now under the Tory government itself. 6 million people are earning less than the living wage. 1 million are on 0 hours contracts. Public sector workers have had a pay cut of at least 14% over the past 7 years. We will lift the pay cap on the public sector. We will introduce a living wage of £10 an hour by 2020. And we won't punish workers who want to take their rights to a tribunal where they have to pay charges and fees. We will abolish that. Our determination is that those who produce the wealth of this country should benefit from the wealth of this country. What we've seen is a massive gap growing between those at work and those at the top. It's times 186 between those on the shop floor and those in the boardroom. That has to change, and we will ensure it does.
Angus Robertson, how would you help working people like Nicola?
Well, the first thing I would say is that governments have choices about the kind of economic policy they pursue, and the Tories, now alone in government and previously working with the Liberal Democrats, introduced austerity measures which are hitting those in society with the lowest incomes the most. And frankly, I think the time has come for that to end. And politicians can make different choices, and every SNP MP elected to Westminster will stand up for those different choices and an end to austerity. It is about choices. The Tories have chosen to support those who are wealthiest in society. We don't agree with them. We think those who have the most should pay a little bit more, and that's why we're in favour of the highest earners seeing their taxes rising from 45 to 50p. We're also, incidentally, supportive of looking at changes to the pay restraint that we've seen through these times of austerity. That's going to happen in Scotland under an SNP government. We will press the UK government to do the same in the rest of the UK. Lastly, I want to make this point. Some of those people on the lowest incomes have been massively hit by welfare cuts. And I think the time has come to end punishing disabled people, end a bedroom tax, and leaving people with the lowest incomes with too little to pay for the essentials.
Okay,
that
can
change. It's about political changes.
To respond to the direct points.
Well, on the direct point of payments to help people who are disabled, we are a party who will always support those in most need. And the welfare bill for helping people on disabilities has gone up 7 billion in the past 7 years and is now at 50 billion. We will always provide that safety net where it's needed.
Amber, you tried to take personal independence payments away from people with disabilities, and then you turned yourselves around in a few days on that. You're not credible on this issue.
Jeremy, I know there is no extra payment you don't want to add to, no tax you don't want to rise. But the fact is we have to concentrate our resources on the people who need it most. And we have to stop thinking, as you do, that there's a magic money tree. You have to be accountable of the money you want to spend.
I'd like to bring in some of the other parties. Tim Farron, you've argued for this election being about providing a good and credible opposition. Which of these parties do you think has the right economic formula for living standards?
I mean, to answer Nicola's question, I mean, economics is about people. It's not about figures. It's about people's experience and how they can afford to feed their children and look after them. Like many people, I have known in my life what it's like to not be able to pay the bills. It matters to me that we build a country for all of our children where people are decent to one another. A strong welfare state is essential. I've been helping 2 people in my constituency with their PIP payments in the last month, both of whom were chief executives of different companies in the not-too-distant past. Everybody out there who thinks that welfare is some kind of a burden needs to remember that any one of us is only 1 or 2 steps from being in need at any given time. And just to answer the question specifically, what will we do? We will end the benefit freeze. Since the crash in 2007-8, the public sector pay freeze as well, but since that crash, public sector workers have probably borne the brunt of that those cuts, whether it be nurses, teachers, doctors, social care workers. But you also need to support people to be able to go to work and have the ability to choose it. That's why we'll invest that money, 3.6 billion, into childcare for 2-year-olds, 5.6 billion for the 9-month to 2-year-olds, to make sure parents have got the ability to go out to work. Because the measure of the society that we are is whether we look after those at the
Caroline
bottom end.
Lucas of the Green Party.
Well, I want to come back to Nicola's point, because I think the situation that you described, Nicola, is something that people feel up and down this country. You know, and for Amber to say that this is a government that actually cares for those most vulnerable, I think is downright insulting to the kind of people that I see in my constituency surgery. You know, I see letters from a man who can't actually get into the surgery because he hasn't got his mobility scooter and he hasn't had it for 6 weeks because the DLA payment going on to PIP has now been delayed. He is just stuck there. You know, I think there is just simply not a recognition from this government about the pain that it is inflicting on some of the most vulnerable people in our society. And it is a matter of political choices, because we are the 5th biggest economy in the world. And yet, we are a country that has 4 million children living in poverty. We are a country where 1 million food parcels were given out last year. That is just simply quite wrong. And so the Green Party is quite upfront about saying we would make those with the broadest shoulders pay more. We would reverse the changes in corporation tax, which has allowed Theresa May to come up with this vision of the country as some kind of bargain basement tax haven. You know, corporations should be paying their way as well. The money is there if people want to.
When Theresa May became Prime Minister, she talked about the Just About managings. What happened to that?
Well, I would add to the long list of criticisms that Caroline has put out before us that there are now 800,000 fewer households that have workless households in them. We have focused on making sure that people can get into work.
Work doesn't pay. Nurses are going to food.
Caroline, we need to have a system. You cannot ignore the fact that over the past 7 years there have been another 3 million people that have got into jobs. You attack the reductions in corporation tax. You talk about corporations, I talk about jobs. What we need to have is the investment to make sure that people can get those jobs, so they can have the dignity of the jobs, so they can feed their family and they can work and achieve.
What kind of jobs?
Nice try. I can see why they sent you rather than Theresa May.
Hang on, Tim Farron. 2 people haven't spoken yet. Leanne Wood and then Paul Nuttall. I'll come to you.
I'd like to know what kinds of jobs all these extra people are in, because we know that the numbers of people on 0 hours contracts has gone through the roof. My party, Plaid Cymru, has tried in Wales on 7 different occasions to abolish 0 hours contracts, only to be voted down by the Labour government in Wales. But it is a scandal that those people, especially in the public sector, who are on the highest wages get paid pay increases. Politicians have had pay increases, yet those at the bottom have been squeezed. And it's immigrants then who are scapegoated and blamed for those wages being squeezed when it's Tory austerity that is the real cause of that problem.
Paul Nuttall.
Well, wages have stagnated over the past 10 years. There's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, there was the economic crash, but secondly, we've had an oversupply of labour, and that certainly is the case in working class communities. The Bank of England have admitted that that is so. But what we need to do is we need to put more money in people's pockets, and you don't do that through the politics of jealousy or spite. What we need to do is to reduce taxation. So, for example, we propose that we would scrap VAT on fuel bills and do away with green levies, which will put £170 extra back in your pocket per annum. We would also raise the personal allowance to £13,500, again, because we believe that people know how to spend their money better than any government. And as for corporation tax, no, we want to see corporation tax reduced, not raised, because if you raise it, companies will leave this country. If they leave this country, what happens then? There's less jobs, there's less taxation. Therefore, you put people out of work. I'm sorry,
they're starting to leave because of Brexit.
Spite and jealousy does not work.
Okay. Jeremy Corbyn, I'd like you to respond, please, to the point about corporation tax, because that is a risk you're taking.
Paul, that is complete nonsense, if I may say so. Raising... Our corporation tax has been consistently lowered by this government with the support of the Liberal Democrats since 2010.
Yeah.
What we're proposing is to put it up during the lifetime of a Parliament to 26%.
Yes, but
that is less, may I finish? That is less than it was in 2010. And if you put that corporation tax up, you're then in a position to deal with the crisis in social care, the crisis in our NHS, properly fund our schools, and not ask head teachers to collect from the parents to pay the teachers. And I would just say this, since Amber Rudd seems so confident that this is a country at ease with itself, have you been to a food bank? Have you seen people sleeping around our stations? Have you seen... Have you seen the level...
Jeremy, I need
have
to
you
answer
seen
that.
the
I'd
levels
like to
of poverty
your
that
attack.
exist
I'd like to answer
because
your
of
attack.
your government's
Of course,
conscious decisions on benefits?
Jeremy, if
and
you
the
want...
way
Jeremy,
to have people out of food banks, the way to have people not using food
There's
bags...
two of you coming at me now. I'm not sure which I'm going to take.
...that they can
You can
have
take me
good
next.
jobs
Just represent
to go
Theresa
to.
May.
No, I'm sorry, if you want to take us back to the 1970s, then, you know, it'll be bad for the economy. Look, corporation tax in Ireland is 12.5%.
Jeremy Corbyn,
Trump...
I'd like you to
I know
answer
he's
a
got a big
specific
figure,
point
man.
about the many... You made many spending commitments in your manifesto. They are going to cost a lot of money. You would also add to borrowing. How does that create the economy that enables more to be spent on working people who need it?
Well, what we've had is a government for the past 7 years that has borrowed more, run up a greater deficit and cut public services at the same time and had the lowest growth rate of any industrial country. It isn't, the system they have is not working. What we're proposing is to raise corporation tax, yes, in order to make the funding commitments that I've already outlined, but it's also to establish a serious national investment bank to invest in infrastructure all around this country so we do get a sustainable, growing economy. We cannot go on giving money away to the very rich. This government's proposing another 60 billion in tax giveaways in the next 5 years. Instead, I say turn it round and invest in the future of all of our people.
I'd like to first get Paul Nuttall on this, and then I'll come to you, Tim Farron.
Businesses will leave this country, and if businesses leave the country,
They're leaving
there's less
already
tax.
because of Brexit, Paul. They're leaving already
businesses
because of Brexit.
If businesses leave, there's less tax, there's less jobs, and more people will be unemployed. That's what you'll get if you vote Labour.
Tim Farron.
We need to tackle Nicola's concerns by being compassionate to the individual and standing up for them, but we also have to get the big choices right. The elephant in the room. The fact is, we need to remain in the single market, or else we will not be able to afford the National Health Service, social care, or any of the support we're talking about. And if Jeremy cared about having enough money to spend on those who need it the most, to raise living standards, he would not have trooped through the lobbies with the Conservatives and UKIP to trigger Article 50 and to make Britain poorer.
Amber,
I'm sure there will be an opportunity to debate that, but I just have to take on some of Jeremy Corbyn's fantasy economics. I mean, he has this monetary wish list in his manifesto. It's very easy to think about how you spend money. It's much harder to think about how you raise money. And his proposals don't add up. It's though he thinks it's some sort of game, a game of Monopoly perhaps, where you ask the banker for the red money to buy the electrics, the green money to buy the railways, and the yellow money to buy the gasworks. Well, it's not like that, Jeremy.
Well,
this is people's
fantasy.
hard-earned money, and we will protect that.
So,
we won't roll the dice.
£15 billion
Thank you for all your responses to this particular question. It is time for us to move on to our second question of the evening, and this one is from Ghulam Nabi Adam.
Hello. Once we have left the EU, how would your party ensure we have the workers and the skills we need to make the UK a success?
Thank you. How would we have the workers and skills we need to make the UK a success after Brexit? Paul Nuttall.
Very easily, because we then can control our own borders. And when people went out last year and voted on June the 23rd, they didn't just vote to control borders, they voted to reduce immigration as well. Because, you know, last week it was announced that a city the size of Hull came to this country.
That wasn't on the ballot paper, though.
Hang on, hold on. A city the size of Hull came to this country net. That's going to be a Birmingham over a 5-year period. It's unsustainable. What we need to do is we need to reduce immigration, and we do it by having an Australian points-based system. So if you've got the skills that this country needs, yes, please come here and work. But beyond that, we have to get the population under control, because if we carry on the road we're on, we'll have a population of 80 million by the middle of this century. Now, you just think what will happen. There'll have to be a huge school building programme. There'll have to be new hospitals, new motorways, a new rail network, new houses. We're already having to build a house every 7 minutes simply to keep up with the numbers of people coming to this country.
Okay,
we reduce immigration, have a points-based system, it will be good for the economy and it will be good for social
Can I just
cohesion.
take I've made a lie.
Last week,
he needs to be picked up on that lie.
A middle-aged Asian man on his way home from work was abused and called racist names and called a terrorist. He had just finished 50 hours saving lives after the Manchester bomb. He was a doctor. And that is what happens when you demonise immigrants. Absolutely. That is what happens when the language... And so, does immigration cause pressures that need to be met? Do we need to invest more in infrastructure to make sure we invest the taxes that immigrants pay to make sure that we provide for everybody? Of course, yes. Do we need, as I'm afraid the Prime Minister has done for the last 7 years, first as Home Secretary and then Prime Minister, set completely balmy, bogus targets that she fails to meet every single year? No, we don't. What we need is an immigration policy that is good for Britain, good for our businesses, good for our farmers, good for tourism, good for our health service, a wise immigration policy, good for Britain, not a conservative immigration policy written to appease UKIP.
Tim, I've just offered you...
Paul Nuttall, I'd like to get Amber to respond.
Immigration is an important part of building our country, strengthening our economy and supplying the additional support that we need to our schools. But we have to make sure we have an immigration policy that we can control. We have said, the Conservative Party and the government, that we will continue to reduce those numbers. And as we leave the European Union, we'll have more chance to do that and to be able to decide who comes to this country. But be in no doubt, we will always have an immigration policy that, although it continues to reduce, will attract the brightest and the best, and will make sure that people can come here to support our economy and develop businesses here.
Jeremy Corbyn, you were talking about immigration today, and you said you would make no false promises about cutting it. Does that mean you will make no promises at all on cutting immigration?
What will happen on leaving the European Union is that we cease to be members of the single market, and therefore free movement ends. What we're saying is that every EU national that is resident in this country must be given permanent rights of residence here and not blocked for it by this government. And secondly, that we would ask, as we've already done in opposition, that all European governments do the same for British nationals that are living there. And that we recognise the massive contribution made by people to this country who've come from all over the world, as well as from Europe, to our health service, our education, our industries, our universities and our science.
If both of the things you said are a different point from the one I put to you, which is, would you make any promise on cutting immigration?
What I would say is we will have a fair and managed migration system that is based on the needs of this country
fair?
and the rights of family reunion.
What is fair?
Fair is where you bring people in when they've got jobs to come to, or it's necessary for them to be working here, or we need them to assist in the economy. That is fair, but it's also important...
So immigration will go up, Jeremy?
It's also important that we maintain the links of universities with universities across Europe. This government, under Theresa May, sent vans around Brent telling people to go home, has refused to allow refugee children in. I think we need to...
Leanne Wood, you have campaigned for more immigration to Wales, to get Wales the workers it needs. In your manifesto, did you not say that that you wanted a visa system for Wales so that you can attract the workers you need, which means that you don't feel Wales has the workers it needs at the moment?
We want to maintain our economy. We want to make sure that
so you need more workers. You need more workers from outside Wales.
Well, we're quite happy with the ones we've got.
So why do you need a visa system to attract more workers to Wales then?
Because Theresa May is going to end freedom of movement, and that brings specific risks to the Welsh economy and the Welsh NHS.
So you may need more workers to come to Wales in the future from outside.
We want to keep the ones we've got.
Okay.
But can I just make this point
how does that square with most
UKIP?
people in Wales voting for Brexit?
Sorry?
How does that square with most people in Wales voting for Brexit?
Well, UKIP has just claimed that people voted to leave the European Union, and in so doing, they also voted to curb immigration. I don't think we can read that into the result. Some people may well have voted to curb immigration, but there was only one question on the ballot paper, and immigration wasn't on it. And I'm afraid that UKIP keep using this issue. They want to whip up people's hatred, division, and fear, and that's why they talk about immigration all the time.
I've got to come back on that. Right.
Stop lying about immigration.
Listen. This isn't about immigrants, it's about government policy. And the government have got it wrong time and time again. Amber, for example, her party have said in 3 manifestos now that they're going to get immigration down to the tens of thousands. You know, it's Jack and Ori. Oh. It's not going to happen. Jeremy won't give you a figure because under Labour, immigration will go up. There's only one party on this platform tonight who will see real cuts of immigration, which is, by the way, is what the majority of British people want.
We've seen
poll after poll shows it time and time again.
From the Nuffield study that you're looking at £1 billion additional cost to our National Health Service because the government's bungling of the deal with Europe, which means that you'll have thousands of thousands of pensioners from Europe, British pensioners, returning to the United Kingdom.
Can I just say, I think this debate shames and demeans us all. I don't think there's anyone in this room or anybody watching this debate from Cornwall to Caithness who does not understand the positive contribution that people have made to this land who've come from the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. And demonising those people is totally unacceptable. Scotland's experience, Scotland's problem has never been immigration, it's been immigration. Now, it may well be the case that there are different realities in different parts of the UK. I accept that. But in Scotland, we value the contribution of people who've come to our land. We value refugees who've sought refuge in our country. And there is much, much more that we should do to make sure that people are able to stay in Scotland. But we should also be able to protect people who've come there.
Okay, would you put
so the first thing that I would do...
any upper limit on immigration to Scotland?
The first thing that I would do is make sure that every EU citizen who is here is guaranteed the right to stay. It is totally unacceptable that this Tory government hasn't been prepared to give them the guarantee, the promise that they can stay. I think that's totally unacceptable.
Yes. Caroline Dickinson, then I'll get Amber Rodgers.
Mishal, just the last thought. If it is perfectly possible to have different immigration policies in countries such as Canada and Australia, who have different policies between different provinces in their country, it's perfectly possible to have different immigration rules for different parts of the UK, and that's what the SNP supports.
Right, and I asked you about the question about what upper limit you'd put on it, which you haven't answered.
Well, at the present time, our problem is we're losing people. I don't know how many people saw the reports last week. The issue for us is people are now leaving, and that will have a detrimental impact on our NHS and our public services.
Well, on the subject of the right of EU nationals who've made their lives here in good faith to stay here, I just think it is unbelievably cruel to be using those lives as bargaining chips in these negotiations. The government right now could be saying those people should be able to stay right now. But I want to be able to make the case proudly for free movement. I think free movement has been the most wonderful gift, the ability to travel and work and live and love in 27 other member states, and for them to come here. And I have to say, I am sorry that the Labour Party now doesn't support that, because I think our country is enriched by people coming from other countries. I think that the Britain that I love is a confident, outward-facing country, recognising that migration makes a massive positive contribution. And I think right now we have people like Paul and his hate-filled rhetoric will make people feel, that makes people feel as if the reason that they can't get a leg on the housing ladder, or the reason they can't see a GP, is because of migration. It is not because of migration, it is because successive governments haven't invested enough in our public services.
Okay.
If you are in a queue, if you are trying to see someone in the NHS, if you're trying to see someone in the NHS, you are more likely to find a migrant actually treating you as a doctor than ahead of you in the queue.
Okay. Jeremy Corbyn, could you respond to the point on giving up on freedom of movement?
The problems that we have of exploitation of workers in this country and groups of workers that have been brought in wholesale from lower paid economies in Central Europe is a serious one. Those people are themselves grossly exploited. They're brought here to undermine existing pay and working conditions and create... Hang on, wait, can I finish? That will make the situation worse in any community where that takes place. I was demanding that we have a proper regulation whilst we were still members of the European Union before the referendum. That whole strategy has to stop. There has to be a managed migration that isn't designed to undermine working conditions in this country.
We are now seeing the Labour Party,
and a lot of people make a great deal of money out of the poverty of those people.
For years, I am astonished that the Labour Party is now aping UKIP in using the same arguments about immigration.
No.
The single European market really matters to all of us right across the UK.
Did you not notice there was a referendum?
People really matters too. Why don't you stand up to the Tories and say, we want to remain within the single European market because it matters to jobs of people from Britain and the rest of Europe who live in the UK.
What we're negotiating...
Speak louder than words. And what we have is lots of rhetoric around here about helping, for example, those EU nationals who live here, who raise their children here, who work in universities like this, who serve in our hospitals. But when it came to the vote in the House of Commons, the Labour Party did not show up. In the Lords, they instructed their people to vote against the Liberal Democrat amendment, which would have guaranteed that right to remain for EU citizens.
Okay.
It is a stain on our nation. We have not allowed them to remain.
Amberod, can you respond specifically to the point that you're using those people, the EU citizens here, as bargaining chips?
Well, absolutely untrue. What we're concerned about are the 4 million. So there's 3 million here, and there's 1 million UK citizens in the rest of the European Union. We need to make sure that we get a deal to protect all their rights. But as all this squabbling was going on, I was thinking about June the 9th, and I was thinking about the different leaders who've had discussions about so-called progressive alliance, and I was thinking how chaotic it would be if they all got together, formed a coalition, and tried to run a government and tried to do a negotiation
Tory UKIP coalition
with the European Union.
Can I tell you what's chaotic?
This is
What is chaotic? What is chaotic? What is chaotic, Amber, is you and UKIP arm in arm. It is a sickening prospect. And you stood on a platform just about a year ago saying that you thought that Britain would be safer, stronger and better off in the EU. Now, were you wrong then, or are you wrong now? Because we can't trust you on this. You are now hitching your wagon to UKIP.
You said you wouldn't trust Boris Johnson to drive you home.
What I'm consistent about, Caroline, is accepting the result of a referendum. I know that for Angus, there's no referendum result he will accept. Everyone seems to be wrong to him. But the fact is, we had this debate last year. There has been a result, and I want to make sure that we get the right result. And under Theresa May, we will negotiate.
Why isn't she here to defend herself? Why is she here? Why is she not here to defend it herself?
Particular question. Thank you all very much indeed. It's time to bring in our next question. And this one comes from Rhiannon Buckley.
Hi. All the parties have promised more money for our public services. Where is that money coming from, and how can we trust that your plans will add up?
Thank you. Promises of money for our public services. Where does the money come from? How can we trust your plans add up? Caroline Lucas.
Well, the first thing to say is that we would stop spending money on things that we simply don't think is a good use of money. And Trident nuclear weapons would come pretty close to the top of that list. So we would scrap nuclear weapons, That would give us around 130 billion minimum over the next 30 years. We wouldn't be building HS2. We wouldn't be going ahead giving massive subsidies to Hinkley nuclear power station. So first of all, the thing you do is to stop wasting money. And then you have a principle that says that those people who have more money, who have the broadest shoulders, should be giving more into our system. So essentially what we need to be doing is to be levying things like a wealth tax, looking at issues around, as I said before, corporation tax. I think it's wrong that we're going for this bargain basement tax haven. I think we should be going for a country where corporations pay their tax. But the bottom line is that this country is not a poor country. The money is in the wrong hands. There is vast inequality in this country. And if we were to sort that problem out, then we would have a much better chance of ensuring that public services are properly paid for. Take the NHS, for example. We put far less into the NHS than most other countries of a similar GDP, the similar wealth. We don't put that money in our public services, and therefore we don't have the world-class public services that we demand. The Greens are really clear that for us, public services should be in public hands, they should be not having the private sector in them, and they should be properly resourced.
Thank you, Caroline Lucas. I'm going to turn to Amber Rudd. The question is about trusting the plans, and in your manifesto, there was a notable absence of costings.
Well, I would say, in answer to that question, judge us on our record. On our record, we have cut we have cut the deficit. We have cut the deficit. We've reduced taxes for the lowest paid, and we've made sure that we've continued to invest in the NHS,
1.7
which is getting another £8 billion
a
year by the end of this Parliament. But the only way we can have that money to invest in our public services, and we know the importance of our public services, our schools, our hospitals, is to make sure that we have a strong economy, which does sometimes mean making difficult choices, those sort of choices that no other party here is prepared to face up to. We have to make sure that we control our spending so we have that strong economy. But the sure way to bust our economy, to lead to danger, is to have false negotiations with the EU, to have the sort of leader like Jeremy Corbyn, supported perhaps by the people here, who would create just confusion when trying to deal with the 27 different states.
You can say that.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm very clear that we will negotiate tariff-free trade access to European markets so that our manufacturing industry jobs are defended and supported, and we have a growing economy as a result of that. We have made a number of very clear spending commitments in our manifesto. They're set out here in a spending plan. They're also set out in the manifesto itself. The government, the Conservative government, has made a lot of choices. We know what those choices are. Our schools are underfunded, our hospitals are overcrowded, our students are saddled with debt, there's a growing housing crisis. And at every single turn, their answer is to further reduce corporation tax and further reduce tax for the very wealthiest in our society.
Are you sure?
I'll give you an example.
I just want to ask, are you sure that your plans add up? I mean, it was only yesterday you couldn't remember the cost of one of your policies.
I'm absolutely sure that they add up. Absolutely clearly about this. For example, if we want to remove university tuition fees, and we do, so our students are not saddled with debt, and restore maintenance grants so that all children, whatever their background, have a chance of going to university, that will cost £11 billion. I think that is money well spent. I think that is the kind of investment this country needs.
Do you think
why should a child's future be determined by the postcode in which they're born? That's why we are determined to bring in free preschool, 30 hours a week from 2 to 4-year-olds, and make sure that every primary school child gets a free lunch every day so they can learn while they're properly fed.
But Jeremy, you have a Labour government in Wales and they aren't doing those things. You have a Labour government in Wales that is charging students to go to university. Yeah. Why are you saying this here when you have an example of a Labour government in Wales not doing that?
And a UK government policy.
So Labour's different in UK and different in Wales?
It's going to be a UK policy, and it will mean that the money is made available there by increasing tax, not for the first 95% of the population, but the other 5% to ensure the funds are there. Because I am fed up with... Can I just finish? I'm absolutely fed up with the idea that so many children growing up in poorer households and poorer communities don't get the same chances as others to get to university and get on in life. They lose, and we all lose, because we lose those skilled, brilliant people that want to contribute to our community.
Angus Robertson. Your manifesto also included major spending promises, an extra £180 billion for public services, UK-wide.
Yep, it's actually 128 billion. The different sources are rescheduling the UK's finances in 10 billion, that's 118 billion, and 10 billion in funds to be raised through taxation, largely through the 45 to 50 pence tax raise change. I'm just interested by Jeremy, following SNP policy on tuition fees. I'd like to congratulate you, Jeremy. It's a shame your party north of the border has opposed the SNP so regularly on things. But can I bring up a really serious issue, which I think has been the biggest so far in the campaign? And that relates to social care and to pensions. And I think when older people are facing the most likely prospect, which is a re-elected Tory government, sadly, and they are promising a dementia tax, an end to the winter fuel payment, and cuts to the pension, I think those people deserve to know by how much. Exactly. And they haven't been told. Now, the Prime Minister didn't have the guts to come along this evening to tell us. So I'd like to challenge... I would like to challenge Amber Rudd. I would like to challenge Amber Rudd to tell us the answer to that question now, because they must have costed it. They must know how much money that will bring in. Please tell the pensioners of this country how much they will have to pay to fund Tory austerity. How much?
OK, don't give up on me quite yet, Angus. It's only halfway through the debate. Theresa may not be here, but I hope to make a good fist of setting out the Conservative Party policy.
Please answer the question.
We've made a clear decision to make sure that we protect the poorest in our society, which means that the pensioners will be protected, that winter fuel payment won't be paid to millionaires.
What's happening to the triple lock?
It'll be focused.
But so where will the level be put then? Where will the level be put?
Under a Labour government, the pensioners saw a rise in their pensions of 85p in 1 year. Under this government, we've seen pensioners' pay rise by over £1,000.
Can you now commit to protecting the triple lock? Are you going to protect the triple lock?
No, we've said very clearly.
Are you going to protect the triple lock?
Jeremy, have you not read my manifesto? I'm happy to give you a copy afterwards.
I'd love to have one, but I'd like the answer now. Are you going to protect the triple lock?
No, they're going to get rid of it, Jeremy. They're going to get rid of it.
Amber Rudd, could I ask you, please, there are two specific points here. One is about the level of the cap on social care, and the other is you also haven't said at what level you'd be means testing the winter fuel payment.
We have said we will consult on that, but I can tell you very clearly that the billionaires will not be given it. But Jeremy has particularly asked me about looking after pensioners, and I would like to answer that. We will always look after pensioners, ensuring they have the dignity and security in retirement. And we have made sure, we have committed to making sure that their pension will always be uprated according with earnings or inflation. That is so different to the commitment they got under Labour.
This is the critical point here.
Tim Farron.
I don't have answers to your question.
That Amber Rudd is not answering. You see, what we have is a general election in 8 days' time. Theresa May assuming a colossal landslide. That's why she thinks she can ignore it all and not bother turning up tonight. And she's telling you, we will take your house off you, and we will allow you to know how much we'll let you keep after you've given me a colossal majority. So if tonight you resolve to vote Conservative on the 8th of June, you are resolving to give Theresa May permission to do what she likes. And that's with education cuts, that's with NHS cuts. Do not give her a blank cheque. Now, there's a question about how you make things add up. The Liberal Democrats have got a fully costed manifesto. I tell you what, though, there's a long-term economic plan underlying the whole of the Liberal Democrat manifesto, and that is don't leave the European single market and throw away £15 billion every single year in revenue to the tax
briefly, you have been clear about how you would pay for the extra £6 billion that you would give the NHS. So do you think that would be transformative? Because there are a lot of experts who say that actually it wouldn't make that much of a difference.
To me, the NHS is personal, not political. My mum, who had ovarian cancer, from the point of her diagnosis to her treatment, to her care, to her passing away in a ward just 2 floors away from the one where she'd given birth to me, like everybody out there, our experience of the National Health Service is personal. And let me finish. And the point is simply this. If you look at and you use National Health Services, you know, as we saw in Manchester just last week, how utterly brilliant, caring, dedicated and professional they are. And yet, Caroline, let me finish, you know I didn't. So what we've got here is you see the professionalism and the decency of those people, but have we got the best funded health service in the world? No, we haven't. We spend less on our NHS than health than in Portugal, than on Spain, than on Greece. It's important that we put a penny on income tax to fund the National Health Service and the recovery of it.
The question was, how would you raise the money? We've been quite detailed about how we raise the money. We would, firstly, we'd scrap HS2, which is only there for the benefit of one place and one place alone, and that is London. We'd also look at the Barnett formula, which gives the Scots £1,700 per head more than us, the English. It needs to be scrapped. We'd also get an EU dividend, and finally,
the £350 million. The famous £350 million a week.
We would slash a foreign aid budget, which is costing the British people £30 million every single day. Hang on, and we would transfer that. We would transfer that money to the National Health Service, and that's why, because we're prepared,
we can't hear him speak.
Because we're prepared to look at different priorities, we can give the NHS an extra £9 billion a year, £2 billion extra for social care.
It's not that long ago that you called the NHS a monolithic hangover from days gone by.
You said, let's privatise it.
You want to privatise it.
When did you change your mind?
And in the areas of procurement, I think I was right. I think the NHS could do better. However, what I will say is we're going into this and the last general election with a clear commitment to keep the NHS in public hands and put £9 billion extra in. And that's taking money from a foreign aid budget, as I say, which is costing us at the present moment in time £13 billion every single year.
Thank you all for your responses to that question. Just a reminder that if you want to have your say on tonight's debate, you can join the conversation on social media using the hashtag BBC Debate. We still have time for more questions from our audience here in Cambridge, and we can go to the next of those questions now, and it comes from David Mansfield.
Good evening. What are your priorities for making Britain a safer country and the world a safer place?
Thank you. What are your priorities for making Britain a safer country and the world a safer place? Angus Robertson.
Well, the first thing is I imagine at the forefront of your minds, and I'm sure I speak for all of my colleagues here, at the forefront of all of our minds are all of the families who suffered the devastation to their loved ones and relatives with the attack on Manchester. What happened there was a horror, and sadly it's happening far too often, both here and round about the world. So I think the first thing that we need to do is that we do need to take safety and security seriously. We need to invest in the police, not cut them as has been the case in England. In Scotland, we've managed to maintain police numbers, so that's my first step. Let's make sure we back the police, give the resources that they need, back our intelligence services who do a tremendous job. There's been some discussion, has there not, about the link between UK foreign policy and becoming perhaps a terrorist threat, and I think that's a dangerous link to draw. However, I would say this. I think we are right to question our intervention in different parts of the world, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya. And the lesson I draw from that is not that it is wrong sometimes to intervene. We agreed that helping people in Libya was a good thing. But what was wrong was spending 13 times more bombing that country than helping to rebuild it, and leaving areas of the world with ungoverned spaces is where terrorism and extremism thrives. So we need to do everything that we can to counter extremist thought, give the police and security service the tools that they require. So not cutting the police would be a first step that I would take from Scotland's experience. And I think we want to be very cautious about how we intervene internationally. And if we're going to do it, we have to think long and hard about how we make sure that those places remain stable and safe for years to come.
Jeremy Corbyn, you have talked about our foreign interventions and our safety here at home.
What happened in Manchester was unbelievably abominable in every way. Innocent lives were taken of mainly young women out enjoying themselves. I want to live in a country that protects the right of people to go out and enjoy themselves at any town or any city in this country. The consequences of that are appalling for those families, and I hope those that are perpetrated this act are all discovered and brought to book. But there's also a question we have to ask about the number of police officers. Under Amber Rudd's time in the Home Secretary and Theresa May before that, 20,000 police officers have lost their jobs. There are fewer police officers around than there were 7 years ago, and those cuts are going to continue. I think it's important that we restore that. What I also think, if I may say so, is the point that Angus was alluding to about terror threats and other threats to our security. There are terrorist threats, obviously. There are also cyber attacks threats, as the National Health Service discovered. It's also important that we recognise that leaving large spaces of, for example, Libya, ungoverned, leaves an opportunity for those who wish to do harm to an awful lot of people, a space in which to develop to do that harm. If you intervene somewhere, the consequences go on for a very long time. And I think we have to think it through. But I'm not saying...
Without the police cuts, are you saying the attack in Manchester wouldn't have happened?
No, I'm absolutely not saying that. The attack in Manchester happened because somebody decided that they had... they wanted to go and kill a large number of people for some perverted belief in their minds. They have to be dealt with, and those people that were under threat have to be protected. What I'm also saying is, though, it would be extremely unwise for any government to ignore, any government anywhere in the world, to ignore what is happening in Libya, where large areas are left ungoverned and very dangerous forces are arising there. What we need to do is recognise the human rights and justice of people all around the world and be prepared to support them, not just go in and bomb and do nothing about it afterwards, which is what happened in Libya.
You've said, just quick point of fact before I turn to Amber Rudd. Diane Abbott has talked about 10,000 more police officers. You're saying 20,000.
No, I said 20,000 have been cut by the Conservative government.
Right, so you would
we
bring
would put 10,000 more on. What I would also want to add, and I think it's important, is the response of people in this country to what happened in Manchester. I was in Manchester straight after the event took place, and Tim was there as well, and Amber. The most amazing sense of community unity came together. They were not going to allow that individual who killed those people to divide our communities. They were going to be united in response to it.
Thank you. And it's a really important question, because the first job of any government is to keep its citizens safe and secure. But I'm going to level with you. Since 2014, we have been at the threat level of severe, which means an attack is highly likely. As Home Secretary for the past year, I've seen the evidence. I've seen the warrants crossing my desk. I spend about 2 hours a day looking at them, seeing the real damage that some of these terrorists want to do us. The way we try to stop them is by supporting our security services and our counter-terrorism police. The best way to try and intervene in those plots is to make sure that they are well funded. And we've increased their budgets significantly since 2015, and we hope to further on.
Okay, what about the ordinary police, though? How do the cuts in police numbers make us safer?
No, but the fact is, there were reductions in police budget because we had to make changes in order to live within our means after 2010. But the police responded incredibly well. Crime has fallen by a third between 2010 and 2015, and we've protected the police budget going forward. So government can make sure that we live within our means and protect the communities, but particularly on terrorism, if I may, we have to make sure we also have the right legislation. And I am shocked that Jeremy Corbyn, just in 2011, boasted that he had opposed every piece of anti-terror legislation in his 30 years in office. And I really think he must be held accountable for that, because I find it chilling.
Can I just remind you that in 2005, Theresa May voted against the anti-terrorist legislation at that time. And she voted against it, as did David Davis, as did a number of people that are now in your cabinet, because they felt that that legislation was giving too much executive power. My opposition to anti-terror legislation isn't opposition to protecting us from terrorism. It is simply saying there must be judicial oversight over what is done in our name. You cannot give...
There is judicial oversight.
I'd like to get the other parties
Jeremy, you are very good
I have made that very clear,
the terrorists.
right from the Prevention of Terrorism Act
you
in the
cannot
1980s.
Undoubtedly.
Tim Farron, a specific point for you. In your manifesto, you said you were going to roll back state surveillance powers by ending the indiscriminate bulk collection of communications data. Now, that was before Manchester. Do you still stand by that as the right thing to do?
Yeah, if you look at the security services, what do they need? Do they need more powers, or do they need to make use or be given the resources to make use of the powers powers they already have. The temporary exclusion orders, which exist now, only one has been used in the last 2 years. But undoubtedly, the shadow that we are standing in now is that of Manchester. And Manchester is my capital city. It matters to me. As Jeremy said, I was there the night afterwards. All 4 of my kids knew people who were in Manchester that night. And it just reminds you of how safe our police and our security services keep us, the countless times that those kinds of outrages had been prevented. So to answer the question, how do you deal with it? How do you tackle that terrorism? Well, we will give an additional £300 million to police to make sure that we deal with the community policing that is so necessary. We will also ensure that we restart engagement with communities where terrorism can be fostered, so you get on the inside to prevent it and nip it in the bud. But there is undoubtedly an international angle to this too. And here's the thing. The terrorists that hate Britain, do you know what? They hate Belgium. They hate France. They hate Germany. They hate our way of life. They hate everything that we stand for. And just as we in Manchester stood together against terrorism, and across Britain we stand together against terrorism, so we must stand together with our neighbours, not just in this continent, around the world, with shared values to fight it. And that will mean diplomacy. That will mean all sorts of things, but sometimes it will take real, serious action. Sometimes it might even mean military action. You have to do the tough thing to defeat the terrorists.
Paul Nuttall.
Well, it's quite clear that the war in Iraq and the bombing of Libya was fundamentally wrong, because all we were doing is we were removing, yes, evil dictators, but it was quite clear that what was going to come next was going to be even worse. But that isn't, our foreign policy isn't an excuse for what went on in Manchester, and what politicians need to do is at least have the courage to name what it is. It's Islamist extremism. It's Islamist extremism. But nobody seems...
Let him have his.
Tim, you've just had a diatribe, so let's crack on.
It's your turn for a diatribe.
It's Islamist extremism. Nobody seems to have the courage to say what it is. How we solve it? Well, we put 20,000 police officers back on the beat, 4,000 more on the border force. We tighten our borders, 7,000 new prison officers, because radicalisation is rife within our prisons. And I must say, I can't believe that we've allowed 350 jihadis to return to our country from Libya and Syria. I'm sorry, if you go out and fight or support Islamic State, you should have your passport revoked and you should never be allowed back into this country. Now, what we've also got to do is look at radicalisation within our own mosques. And I will say, Amber, I think you need to look at Saudi and Qatari funding of mosques in this country. And finally, we need to get the Muslim community itself to sign up to the PREVENT programme. Only 1 out of 8 referrals to PREVENT come from within the Muslim community. We have to rebuild trust and confidence in PREVENT.
You know, Paul, that the murderer last Monday was reported 5 separate occasions by the Muslim community. They want our safety as much as anybody else.
Caroline Lucas.
Well, thank you to David for the question, and it's an incredibly important question. And let me be very clear to begin with that people who commit the kind of atrocities like the one in Manchester are barbaric, and what they stand for is evil. But the best form of defence against attacks like that is intelligence-led policing and community engagement. And the kind of response we've just heard from Paul, which seems to suggest that the violence in Manchester was somehow representative of Islam, I think is completely outrageous. There is no more representative of Islam than the murderer of Joe Cox was representative of the wider British public. So listen, I'm deeply concerned about the police cuts we've already talked about, and it's interesting that the Police Federation warned that those police cuts could be very dangerous. But I also think it's right that we review our interventions overseas. I think it's a disservice to democracy to pretend there's no link and to close down the debate. The former head of MI5 herself has said that the invasion of Iraq exacerbated the terror threat to the UK and was, in her words, highly significant in terms of homegrown extremists. But what I want to say actually is something to Amber, because we can't solve all the world's problems, but we can at least stop adding to them. And my question is this, really, that why is Britain the second biggest arms dealer in the world? Why are we selling to 22 of the 30 countries on the government's own human rights watch list? Why did we make 10 times more in arms sales to Saudi Arabia than we gave to Yemen in aid?
Amber,
I genuinely wonder how you... It's very nice.
knowing
I
those
will make
figures?
no apology for being a government that wants to defend this country. We will make sure that our defence budget is well funded. We will do that by having a strong economy.
You were selling arms to
we
Saudi
have to
Arabia.
make sure that we can do that by having a strong industry.
Wait,
Arms sales to Saudi Arabia cannot be justified on the grounds of this being good for industry.
No,
this is absolutely leading to many, many
Saudi has the right.
Leanne Wood.
There does need to be some reviewing going on. We need to look at foreign policy. We need to look at the prevent strategy. It is a fact that policing has been cut by 20%, including when Theresa May was in the Home Office. And it's a question of priorities. We should be investing in police and other public services. Those are the people running into the dangerous situation when everyone else is running
and that
away.
point's been repeatedly made. When you say we should look at what we're doing, what would you do differently in terms of tackling extremism?
Well, I think in terms of the cuts to public services, that's had an impact. If you just take one small example, youth work. When you had a well-funded youth service, there were youth workers available to challenge the ideology of young people if it was going in the wrong.
Are you saying austerity has made us less safe?
I'm saying austerity has cut youth workers, and there are fewer people around to challenge the root cause, the ideology that spurs these people on. I used to work as a probation officer. Can I just finish making this point? I used to work as a probation officer. If we are interested in tackling the root cause of this problem, we have to understand what it is, we have to understand those ideological drivers, and they have to be challenged by people qualified to be able to do that. And by cutting youth workers and other public services, then you are reducing your ability to do that. And that is one of the reasons we are less safe.
We have a small amount of time left. Can you be brief, Tim Farron?
There's an awful lot of truth in it. I think the thing we need to remember, particularly when everything is so raw, just 9 days after Manchester, that there's a lot of finger-pointing going on. We all have ideas, and there's some of them different, some of them similar. The critical thing we should remember at this point is that knee-jerk new policies and new laws tend to do more harm than good. More resources for the security services and the police we have already will do a lot more good than harm.
Thank
and
you.
our best response
to
to terrorists is the defiance of keeping on.
I mean, of course. I mean, the vast majority of Muslims in this country are peaceful, they add to our economy, they're great for our culture, but there is a tiny minority within that community who hate who we are, hate the way we live, hate our democracy, and I've called it a cancer in the past. Radical Islam is a cancer and it needs to be cut out. If not, there'll be more attacks like
Manchester. And you haven't ruled out locking up suspected terrorists.
Sorry?
You haven't ruled out locking up suspected terrorists without trial. Would that really make us safer?
Well, frankly, I've said nothing should be taken off the table. As far as I'm concerned, you know, when MI5 tell us that there's a possible 23,000 jihadis out there who want to do us harm, I'm sorry,
they hate our freedom and our liberty.
Let me finish.
Not give away our freedom and our liberty.
Very always briefly, Angus Robertson, and
British
then
lives
Jeremy
over the
Corbyn.
human rights of any jihadi any day.
Thank you,
I remember the question was about terrorism and extremism, and you notice that UKIP went straight for Muslims.
Yeah.
We remember it wasn't, it's my time to speak, not my time to speak. It wasn't a Muslim who shot Joe Cox, one of Jeremy's Labour MP colleagues. It was a British right-wing neo-Nazi. Who was it who gunned down kids in Norway? It was a Norwegian white racist neo-Nazi. There are all kinds of threats, and we need to combat all kinds of.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The response to the people of Manchester was absolutely magnificent. All communities of all faiths came together. And I utterly deplore the language that Paul Nuttall uses and the subliminal attack the whole time on people of Muslim faith in what you say.
You invited Hamas. You invited Hamas to the House of Commons and called them your friends.
Paul, if I may just complete a sentence. Thank you.
To the House of Commons.
I think we have to recognise we live in a multi-faith, multicultural society. An attack on any religion is totally unacceptable, and we should recognise that we should bring people together and have much stronger communities as a result.
Thank you all. Our next question comes from Rebecca Green.
President Trump is pulling out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. How will the panellists deal with that?
Thank you. How would the panellists deal with President Trump wanting to pull out of the Paris Climate Change Agreement? I'm going to ask everyone to deal with this briefly so we can get one more question in before 9 o'clock. Tim Farron.
Right, we'll talk about Brexit being a huge threat or whatever you think. There's nothing bigger as a threat to our country, to our children's future, than the threat of climate change. You worried about immigration? You see the mass movement of people as our land is desiccated and deluged by that climate change. So the reality is simply this. If it is simply for hair shirt, muesli-eating Guardian readers to solve climate change, it ain't going to solve the problem. We're all stuffed. So let's do something that will actually make a difference. And that means a nationwide, indeed a planet-wide, concerted effort to build the future that we need. So for Britain, what can we do? We can make ourselves energy self-sufficient in renewable energy. 95% of the supply chain of energy in this country, of wind, tidal and marine and coastal energy, is British-made. Why not rebuild our economy whilst guaranteeing our children's future?
Thank you. Caroline Lucas.
Well, I just want to thank that so much for that question, because the Green Party has been trying to get climate change onto this election campaign agenda for the past 6 weeks. It has been impossible, so thank you so much for that. It is a vital question. It is the greatest threat that we face. And I think, first of all, in terms of what we do to President Trump, I'm trying to think of a polite answer, but I think essentially what we need to do actually is ignore him, because the economics behind renewables is already such that we know that renewables are going to be cheaper than the fossil fuels that they already replace. So that revolution is already happening. But what we need to do in this country is an awful lot more than is being done by this government or indeed previous ones. First of all, we need to leave 2/3 of all known fossil fuels in the ground if we're to have any hope of avoiding catastrophic climate change. That means a massive investment in renewable energy efficiency. Amber Rudd, of course, was the Energy Secretary for a while, but under her, we did not see the kind of transition we urgently need to see if we're serious about climate change. So we do need to see keeping fossil fuels in the ground, not giving fossil fuel subsidies. We need to see no fracking, not the kind of fracking that is being planned all around the country under this government. We also need to see an end to massive airport
I'm going to stop you, Caroline Lucas, because
there's lots more to say.
I want to turn to Paul Nuttall.
Well, President Trump is doing what he set out to do. I mean, he is the leader of the free world, whether we like it or not. He said during his election campaign that he would withdraw from the Paris Agreement. What he's doing is he's looking at India and he's looking at China, who've got huge coal-fired power station building programs, which are taking place at this present moment in time.
Do you think he's doing the right thing, then?
He's looking at the US economy, and he promised to look after the Rust Belt and working class people, and he knows that if they reduce energy bills, and they will do that by withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, then he will protect the American economy. He's putting America first, and frankly, I think Britain should put Britain first as well.
So you'd want to see Britain doing the same, then?
Well, you know, we are only to blame for 2% of global emissions. And what's going to happen is if energy prices continue to go up, companies will move to countries with lower environmental standards.
Jeremy Corbyn.
We should absolutely adhere to the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and we should urge the American people to press their government, their Senate and their House and their President to adhere to it as well. And in this country, we are determined to achieve 60% of renewable energy by 2030. We're also determined to reduce emissions, but it's not just about climate change emissions. It's also about our attitude towards the environment, levels of air quality and air pollution in our cities, which are not being addressed by this government. And also, when we did have a growing and thriving solar power industry in this country, what did they do? Cut the feed-in tariffs, which destroyed and damaged a lot of that industry.
Amber Rudd.
We need a different approach.
Amber Rudd. The UK's own official advisers say that your government's not on track to meet the pledge of cutting emissions 80% by 2050. Why not?
I'm going to answer the first question, if I may, about the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and I must tell you, I am disappointed. Caroline is right. I led the UK delegation to get that international agreement of 180 different countries pledging to that reduction, and it is disappointing that the Americans are pulling out, but I hope that we can use our relationship with President Trump and our close relationship with the US to try and influence, to try and make sure they nevertheless take the right steps.
Tell him he is wrong.
That's not quite how diplomacy works.
That's what you need to do. You need to show leadership.
why I am optimistic is because there has been such substantial investment in renewable energy, and yes, in solar. It is increasingly doesn't need a subsidy. So because of that investment, it makes good economic sense as well as good renewable
energy. What about air pollution? What about air pollution?
This is
terrible. You take the court over air pollution? What about air pollution?
This is terrible leadership on the part of Donald Trump. It's also appalling leadership on behalf of the Prime Minister, who can't even be bothered to come here and answer these questions for herself today. But it's no surprise either. He was very clear during his election campaign what it was he would be about in terms of climate change, and he is sticking to his line. But he is wrong, and the world needs to tell him he is wrong.
It's bad business. It's bad business.
Angus Robertson.
So to answer the question, I'm more than disappointed. I'm appalled that President Trump has walked away from a global approach to one of the biggest challenges that we face at home and abroad. And what he's done is what many of us fear he's going to do in a number of different ways. He's walking away from having a multilateral approach, working together with other countries to deal with serious problems. And that's why if the UK had a special relationship with the United States, and we remember, of course, the first trip that was made by Theresa May was to see a climate change denier, namely Donald Trump, what kind of influence was used by the Prime Minister then to make sure that he didn't go forward with this disastrous step?
Poor leadership.
Absolutely nothing. This is a government that has got rid of the climate change responsibility at the cabinet table. It is absolutely appalling. So what we need to do is we need to do everything that we can at home. I'm delighted that more than 50% of all electricity generated in Scotland is now through renewables. We would have loved to have gone ahead with carbon capture and storage until Amber and our colleagues scrapped it. So there's much more that can be done. So the Prime Minister and her government need to take climate change seriously in a way that they haven't done in recent years. And we need to impress on all of our international colleagues that we need to work together and get this global challenge sorted.
Thank you for all the responses to that particular question. And it's time now for our last question of the evening, and it comes from Neil Plucknett.
Oh, yeah. In what way does your leadership have the talent and the character required to take this country forward into the future?
Thank you. In what way does your leadership have the talent and the character needed to take this country forward? Jeremy Corbyn.
Leadership is about understanding the people you represent, is about being prepared to learn, is about not being so high and mighty you can't take advice. It is also about bringing people with you. It is also about ensuring that your responsibilities to protect the safety and security of everybody in this country and to lead a government that cares for everybody in the country and doesn't walk by on the other side when there are people that are homeless, there are people that are starving, and we have millions of our children living in poverty. It's leadership to lead a government that is prepared to say to our society, we cannot go on like this. We have to start putting more money into our public services and our resources. We have to have an economy that works for all, and we don't have to have a spiv economy that hands tax relief to the biggest corporations and the wealthiest people whilst ignoring the desperate cries for social help of so many people in our country.
Paul Nuttall, your leadership.
Well, I've never changed my stance, pretty much, on anything. I don't flip-flop. I've always been, for example, a Brexiteer. And look, you know, back when I joined UKIP, you don't join UKIP for a career. You join it because you've got principles. And our principle was simply this. We wanted to get our country out of the European Union, and we were very successful on June the 23rd last year. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to ensure that we get the Brexit that people voted for. A Brexit whereby we control our own borders and cut immigration. We get full control of our waters back and our fisheries. We take full control of our laws and bring them back to Westminster. We leave the ECJ and indeed the ECHR. We're free to sign our own trade deals all over the globe, and we're out of the single market. And most importantly, we pay no divorce bill to the European Union, because since we've been members, since 1973, we've paid £183 billion net in membership fee alone, I'd be strong enough going into these negotiations. I just hope the Prime Minister is as strong.
Would you refuse to pay your dues if you were going through a real divorce? Then?
Sorry?
Would you refuse to pay your dues if you were going through a real divorce?
Well, look, listen, we have given...
Good question.
We have given that club 183 billion since 1973. We've got 9 billion tied up in the European Investment Bank, and indeed we own lots of its real estate.
We all know
what
about blokes like you.
Look,
we all know
listen,
about blokes
don't talk
like
down this country. We are the fifth largest economy
you want a free divorce?
in
It
the
doesn't
world.
happen that way. In the real world, there's no such thing as a free divorce. You have to pay your dues.
Look.
Okay.
This is all about.
Listen,
listen. This is all about trade, and we have a huge trading deficit with the EU. They need us more than we need them. For God's sake, let's be confident about ourselves.
Amber Rudd, the question is about leadership, and the Conservatives have made a lot of noise about Theresa May's leadership, personal leadership, and yet this is a campaign where we saw a major U-turn on social care.
Yes, part of being a good leader is having a good, strong team around you. And I'm proud and delighted to be here representing the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister making that case. Let's face it, Jeremy only decided to come, I think, late this morning. I was rather hoping Diane Abbott might be here so I could debate with her as well. But the fact is, the most important challenge that this government is going to have going forward is getting a good negotiation with the EU. It's going to dictate whether we have a strong economy, whether we can pay good wages to our public servants and support our public services. Theresa May has the support of her team. She has the support of whoever becomes her MPs. Jeremy Corbyn has had a no-confidence vote against him, which 4 out of 5 of his MPs wouldn't support him on. How can he go in to negotiate with 27 different countries with such a weak team and weak support behind him? Theresa May will be able to deliver for us. As Home Secretary, she delivered 35 different opt-outs. She knows how to negotiate and deliver for the European Union. She'll be the right leader for us.
Okay, Jeremy Corbyn, could you respond to that point about the
300,000 people elected me to lead this party, and I'm very proud to lead this party.
I think the first rule of leadership is to show up. You don't call a general election. You don't call a general election and say it's the most important election in her lifetime, and then not even be bothered to come and debate the issues at stake. Now, I feel quite unique here tonight as a co-leader, and I'm proud that the Green Party pioneers new ways of doing things. We want to see job sharing in all kinds of aspects of our lives because we believe that 2 heads are often better than 1, and so I'm very happy to be there with my co-leader, Jonathan Bartley. But what leadership is about, it is about listening. It is about recognising that all of us have leadership qualities. And in particular, I think it's about trusting the public. And on that issue, I do not understand why this government will not allow the people to have the final say on the EU referendum. Why can we not have a ratification referendum when we see the final deal of what Theresa May or whoever it is brings back from Brussels? Why can we not trust the British people to have that final say? If they like what they see, that's great. But if they don't, the way to have another look at that is by voting Green, because we will say on that ballot paper that you should have the right to remain in the EU if that's what you choose when you see the small print. Because since this referendum was called, we have seen so many lies told.
I'm going to turn to Tim Farron. What are your qualities of leadership?
Well, good leaders don't run away from a debate, and Theresa May undoubtedly should be here. Without a shout, whatever we've discussed this evening, her absence is undoubtedly the shadow that hangs over this election. How dare you call a general election, then run away from the debate? We're all products of our upbringing. So I was brought up in Preston during the 1980s, and I saw people around me, what happens when a society, a community, is taken for granted, in that case, by a Conservative government with a colossal majority. Half my mates' parents out at work at any given time. And I am determined to build a country for our kids, mine included, where people are decent to one another, where people have enough, where we have a national health service that is properly funded. And that means being honest with the British people, saying we will put a penny on income tax to have the best health service in the world. It means stopping Theresa May's plans to do to your kids' schools what she's currently doing to our hospitals. And it also means if you want to lead the people, you have to kind of like them as well and spend time amongst them. And if you trust the people, then you do not impose that Brexit deal on the British people without them having the final say. Either the politicians will sign it off or the people will. I trust the people.
Okay, I just want to turn to Angus Robertson, who hasn't spoken yet in this section.
So real leadership is about putting the country before you put your party. And I think we all now know that this was a totally unnecessary election, and the only reason Theresa May called it was that she thought she was going to have a massive majority as a result of it. Whatever happened to strength and stability? Where's strength and stability gone? Weak and wobbly is where we are, not so much the Iron Lady as the U-turn Queen. That is not the leadership that we require. In contrast, as leader of the SNP in the House of Commons, the third party in the House of Commons, I am proud that we have led the effective opposition when, sadly, the Labour Party has too often dropped the ball, asking questions not just about things that matter to people in Scotland, but the rest of the UK, in Europe and the world. And I am confident that the SNP will be returned to Westminster as the third party, because we need to protect our country from the Tories, who sadly, I fear, are going to win this election. I am working hard to win in every single seat in Scotland, Mishal. That is our plan. But I believe people in Scotland realise that it's either the SNP or it's the Tories, and whether they're Labour voters, Liberal Democrats or Greens, they understand that if they vote for those parties, they'll be doing nothing but helping
Angus
the Tories.
Robertson, Leanne Wood.
You know you're losing since you.
I believe leaders should walk the walk and should be prepared to defend their politics and their policies. They should also be prepared to stick to their guns, and it's shocking that Theresa May has U-turned on so many things. There wasn't going to be an election. Now there's an election. There wasn't going to be a tax on the self-employed, or there was going to be a tax on the self-employed, and then it was abolished. And then there's this latest U-turn on the dementia tax. So I'm not one for U-turns. Plaid Cymru will stick to our manifesto promises, and Plaid Cymru will lead for Wales.
Thank you. Thank you to all our speakers for their responses to that final question. That brings an end to our audience questions for this evening. It's time now for our speakers' closing statements. They are just 30 seconds each. They've drawn lots for the order of these closing statements, and I'm going to ask our audience here in Cambridge, please applaud right at the end of all 7 of the closing statements, because we have a limited time left on air. And the first of the closing statements comes from Paul Nuttall.
Tonight, been a little bit like Groundhog Day for me, because you've heard the same arguments, the same excuses, the same platitudes 100 times before. UKIP will always be the outsider in British politics. It'll be the one that the Westminster elites and the establishment media want to mock and ridicule. But we have been proven right. Proven right on Brexit, proved right on immigration, proved right on grammar schools, proved right on protecting our police and security services. On June the 8th, it's your decision, your country, your vote. Vote UKIP.
Caroline Lucas, co-leader of the Green Party.
Tonight, this country stands at a crossroads, and the choice is stark. You can stand up for what really matters, values of openness, tolerance and compassion, or you can turn inward to isolation, division and hate. You know, one more MP from the other parties makes no real difference. But more Green MPs would be truly transformative. On June the 8th, I urge you, don't look back. Choose what kind of future you really want. Vote for change, vote Green, and together, let's build a caring and a more confident Britain.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Tonight, we've seen the real choice facing our country between a Labour government and a Conservative government. This election will decide whether young people are saddled with debt or freed from it, whether we invest in our National Health Service, schools and social care, or they continue to be cut, whether older people get the dignity they deserve or see their incomes fall. On June the 8th, you have the power to decide. Vote Labour for the many, not the few.
Angus Robertson.
In this debate, you've heard different views about the kind of country we should be. For those watching in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, the SNP will always work with others who share our belief in fairness of an outward-looking, welcoming society. Now more than ever, we need a strong opposition to hold the Tories to account. The SNP will be that strong voice for Scotland, and our pledge is this: to work every day to make Scotland the very best country it can be. Vote SNP.
Leanne Wood.
Tonight you've heard that Plaid Cymru is the only party putting Wales on the agenda during this election. But our MPs will play their part for the whole of the UK. We will stand up for justice and fair play on pensions, on social care, and for our cash-starved public services. So I urge people back home to give us the mandate we need to defend Wales. Liking us isn't enough. We need your support and your vote. Don't let our country be invisible in Westminster. Vote Plaid, vote for Wales.
Tim Farron.
Well, look, you've heard my arguments. I'll give you the final say over the Brexit deal. I will put a penny on income tax for the NHS, and I will stand up to the Conservatives over the dementia tax and everything else. Now, Amber Rudd is up next. She is not the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is not here tonight. She can't be bothered, so why should you? In fact, Bake Off is on BBC Two next. Why not make yourself a brew? You are not worth Theresa May's time. Don't give her yours.
And for our final closing statement, Amber Rudd.
Thank you, Tim, for that pass. So you've heard the squabbling and discord of disagreement here tonight. You've seen the coalition of chaos in action. But in the quiet of the polling booth, you have a clear choice. A vote for anyone other than Theresa May is a vote for Jeremy Corbyn and that coalition. Our government needs to be at its strongest to take us through Brexit. It is only Theresa May that can deliver that leadership.
Well, thank you all. There is going to be live reaction to tonight's debate on the BBC News channel, and on Friday, Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May will be taking part in a special edition of Question Time from York. I'd like to thank all our audience here in Cambridge, especially those whose questions were used tonight, and to all of you watching at home, and indeed to the 7 politicians who took part tonight. From all of us here, goodbye.
I want to know
what's really happening, who's saying what,
and why.